Is the tequila market about to collapse? Tequila has been on an absolute tear over the last 20 years, with one report that I found saying that tequila sales as a whole have grown about 300% since 2003, with an average growth of about 7% a year, and that's just compounding year over year. Another report that I saw said that the premium segment of tequila, the higher end stuff, saw a growth of about 1,500% since 2003. I believe in 2022, 2023, tequila actually beat out both vodka and bourbon for the most consumed spirit in the United States, which is insane. Bourbon, one of the most American things on the planet. And so all of that, you were thinking, well, Louis, what do you mean? Like, with all of that sounds amazing. Why would there be any potential collapse? Well, there's actually a lot of different reasons why that could be the case. I mean, I think that there is an oversaturation in the market. I think that with the news of tariffs, I think that could be an issue. Agave prices and strife within the agave farmers in Mexico, and overproduction of tequila as a whole, and maybe there's a lot of inventory down in Mexico. And I think that just a lot of people might be thinking that maybe the wave and the zeitgeist of tequila has passed. Am I fucking 50 using the word zeitgeist? Oh my god. Is this what happens when you have a kid? You just start saying weird shit like a dad? I don't like it.
Just want you to stop saying odd shit.
And so some people might be thinking that maybe tequila's time has kind of come to an end. Well, I think there's so much that we can dive into on all of that, but let's kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about, where tequila was prior to this boom. We're going to talk about some of these issues that are currently facing the industry, and if I actually think that the tequila industry will basically collapse and this $20 billion industry is going to be no more. But before any of that, let's pour ourselves something to sip on while we talk. And really what I want to focus on in this history element is, yes, tequila's been produced for a very long time. I don't want to go through the history of tequila. I've done that in another video. I really want to focus on kind of what happened in the 80s and 90s and on. In the 90s and 80s, you really couldn't get much great tequila. There wasn't a lot being imported. You really only had like 5 options according to one bartender. It was really just some of the bigger guys who have been doing it for so long. And sorry, I forgot to drink. And so you were somewhat limited, and a lot of us have a lot of bad memories of drinking tequila because we were drinking really bad stuff. I'll be honest with you, when I was in college, I used to drink Jose Cuervo Gold with Capri Sun. Don't ask about the Capri Sun, I just thought it was a good mixer. But today, if I even smell that bottle, I will throw up. And I've heard this from so many different people, and I used to say that I used to hate tequila, right? Because of how bad my experiences in college were. But that was in 2014, not 1993, right? There were better options at the time, I just didn't know better. But, people working in the higher end bars and restaurants in the US, they just didn't have that many options. And I don't think it was really that of interest to people. Like, craft spirits weren't really booming yet. We didn't really have the craft cocktail revival yet. And so really there wasn't that much interest in tequila. And what was available were mistos, or tequilas that were not 100% agave. They were usually cut with or mixed with something else, like alcohol from sugarcane, or some other source of alcohol, which isn't great. So it wasn't a pure, it wasn't a pure expression. And tequila really wasn't being consumed by many people. The people just kind of weren't drinking it in bars. It was more of like a vodka soda kind of vibe at the time, or like, those crappily made 90s cocktails, until we had one of the big major shakeups in the tequila world in 1989. And that is because 1989 is the year that Tequila Patron was founded. And whether you like them or hate them or whatever your feelings are on Patron, they really did shake up the industry in a big way. So they were launched in 1989. They started producing their tequila at the Siete Leguas distillery before opening their own distillery shortly thereafter, and kind of trying to basically do a lot of the same stuff that they did at the Siete Leguas distillery at their new distillery. They were the first major brand to actually start to put 100% de agave on their labels, and they were the first ones to be very adamant about, no, we are only going to make 100% agave tequila. There were no more, they didn't want to mess with mistos, right? And they then started pouring a lot of money into expanding Patron and bringing it to the United States. One of the founders is a dude from Paul Mitchell Systems. They make shampoo and things. I don't know. So the guy had a lot of money, and they put a lot of money into marketing. And that's really kind of the through line through the early 2000s, where Patron started to get a lot of traction. They started to spend a lot of money on marketing, and they started to, start getting featured in a lot more places. Maybe some more people started picking it up. It became super prominent kind of across the board. And marketing is really the story of tequila through this period of time. Then in early 2000s, more brands started being founded and started to get some more distribution in the United States. And now that also seemed to align with the craft cocktail revival that was happening in the US that started in the mid 90s and kind of helped usher in this golden age of cocktail making that we are experiencing right now. And so along with those lines with the marketing that we're talking about, brands such as Don Julio, don't ask why I have this bottle, they started really focusing so much on the marketing as well. They started creating bottles like the 1942, started being promoted in clubs. Rappers, artists, musicians started really promoting tequila as a whole, and they really started to lean into celebrity power to start to make tequila more of a household name in the United States. It really kind of reached somewhat of its apex in about 2014, and I don't want to give them credit for anything, but unfortunately I kind of have to. It is an unfortunate truth. That really took off in 2014 when this little brand, I say little, was launched by George Clooney and his rich billionaire buddy. Casamigos was launched by George Clooney, and it became an absolute hit. I think it's a terrible product. I think it's awful product, but what it did for the general public's understanding of tequila, it can't be understated, right? I think that you gotta really credit them for how much they were able to really open people's minds to drinking tequila. Is it drinking bad tequila? Yes. But it really did help create that interest in tequila, unfortunately. Within 4 years of the brand's launch, 4 years, that's no time at all, this sold for $1 billion with a B, billion with a B. So that's how much of an impact they had in that 4-year span. So what happened kind of between then and where we are now? A lot of celebrities were like, oh, what if we launched our own product? And that's how you ended up with things like The Rock's Terramana, Kendall Jenner's tequila, and all of these influx of all of these insanely awful celebrity tequilas that have popped up over the last 6 years. They all wanted a piece of the pie. And I mean, can you really blame them when Casamigos was sold for $1 billion? They kind of had a blueprint of what they wanted to do. Now, in actuality, how did that shake out? Probably not that great, but this isn't a video about celebrity tequila, and I've actually talked about it enough on other videos. I think that one of the big things about this is just that the market kind of matured, and it was basically set on fire by social media. Very similar to what happened with bourbon in the early 2010s. I think about 8-9 years later came this rush for tequila that we've been experiencing over the last 6 years. You started to see a lot of incredible brands become more household names, even though they've been around for a longer time. I'm talking about Fortaleza, which was founded in 2004, I believe, roughly around there, or G4, that are two really renowned and really well-made tequila brands getting a lot more attention. And these are smaller productions. And why do I say that social media played a huge role is because if you were to rewind 15 years ago, none of these small brands would have ever had any chance of making any impact on the industry if a couple of things weren't true. One, if there wasn't such a fervor for tequila because of these other brands that we've talked about. Two, if social media didn't allow the telling of the story of these brands and really exploding it in a viral sense. And three, the market maturing and people finally starting to understand what real tequila, when it's well made, can be. The tequila industry was always dominated by the big players. You're talking about Jose Cuervo, Don Julio, Patron as well. These other brands that really kind of controlled what it was that they were doing, and they were making a lot of money. But people really started to become very conscious of wanting to really purchase great premium and high quality things, and not just premium in a price standpoint. People really started to care about what they were consuming, what they were buying, and really supporting good producers. And you can see that kind of through the whole explosion of things like, for example, whole foods, organic foods, things that really have kind of outside of this have really exploded. Even outside of these brands that are more relatively recent, Carlos Camarena is Felipe Camarena's brother, who made G4. Carlos Camarena is the master distiller for Tequila Ocho, El Tesoro, and Tapatio, and their family has been making tequila for a very long time, and they were really well renowned. I have this older bottle of the El Tesoro Platinum here. El Tesoro has been around for a very long time, very prominent tequila making family, and so they just started to become more available and people actually cared more about them. And so I do think that social media and the accessibility of information really kind of combined with a surge in popularity, which also kind of came along the waning, somewhat waning side of the bourbon world. And it kind of all just kind of came together in this really crazy microcosm that was in a pressure cooker, which then COVID forced us all to be at home and just watch videos all day, all the time, and pick up new hobbies like drinking and a lot and making cocktails. And I think that really was the thing that set all of this off. Like 2019, 2020, we've seen a huge influx of tequila brands, the growth in the sector, and now there's just so much out there. I mean, I started making videos in 2020. It was really, things were blowing up at the time, which was great. First of all, that's a very abridged version of all of this, right? I think that I'm sure I got some certain things wrong, and I think there's more details that we could have gone into, but that's kind of how we got to where we are today. It's a more saturated market. There's a lot of great brands, there's a lot of bad brands, but almost every other spirit over the last couple of years has declined in sales. Tequila has, I think, declined slightly since 2023 to 2024, but I think only by about 1%, whereas everyone else saw larger decreases, right? And speaking of that maturity in the market, I think we're now entering a point where between so many incredible content creators, people on, the written side, people from the different organizations that are really focused on talking about agave education. It's such a hot topic right now, and there's so much out there that we're now in a period of time where the maturity in the market is really hitting its peak, I believe. You can actually learn a lot more there. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to listen to what the person trying to sell me this thing is listing out as fact, right? You can actually do your research and find out more on your own. So where do we stand now, right? Do I think that this is the end? And what are some of the challenges that tequila is facing as a whole? So one of the things that a lot of people like to point to is the price of the agave plant. There have been some crazy fluctuations in agave pricing, and recently there was a couple of protests by agave farmers down in Mexico that were getting a little tense. They were really struggling, and they were fighting for equal and fair rights and fair pay for the work that they're doing. This is backbreaking work to harvest agave for tequila production. The other part was the complete drop in agave prices. They were saying that each agave now is going to like 9 pesos a kilo, which is so cheap. And so that can't be a good sign. There was a report that there was just so much inventory in Mexico that just is kind of just sitting there. A couple of, tangential or like some anecdotal examples is when Kendall Jenner launched the 818 tequila, they priced it very premium. It was like $70 a bottle. Now, I've actually been to a couple liquor stores and seen it for a much cheaper price, as if they're just trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible because it's not moving. The product isn't moving. I think to address the idea that maybe tequila is becoming oversaturated, I think that might be the case. I think there's so many brands getting made day in and day out, and they're each trying to be different, and it's really hard for the people to stand out. Like I get reached out to by brands pretty much daily for people wanting me to try their product, and I mostly don't answer a lot of them now because I'm like, are you going to be around in 6 months, in 8 months? I've spoken to folks in the industry, and they really do think that a lot of these brands are not going to survive. If I do talk to a new brand or start to experience a new product, it's because I think they actually have a chance of creating something unique in this market, because it's hard. It's just so much that goes into it. And I think that one of the big ones that are overarching that I haven't talked too much about on camera is the tariff situation. Whatever you believe in this, it is going to negatively impact your products. We're talking about originally a 25% tariff on any product coming from Mexico. So you're talking about a lot of our agricultural products, a lot of food, veggies, things like that, but also tequila. They eventually came to an agreement or something like that. It was on again, then off again, then on again, then off again. Now we have a blanket 10% tariff on everything at the recording of this video. It could change by the time this comes out, but tequila prices had been rising because the cost of agave had gone up, then come down, then gone up. And now with tariffs, the prices are going to go up again. And I think that maybe that might be something that will impact the consumer and could possibly lead to a lot of brands just being priced out of the market, because they're like, well, why would I spend, 3 times what on this crappy brand versus, this nicer brand over here that's much cheaper, right? Simple example, but one that I think is apt for this. So what are my actual thoughts, right? I've given a lot of different examples of what I think could be leading to possibly a downfall, but where are my actual thoughts on all this? First of all, I still think, and I see this on the daily, that the desire from folks to learn about agave spirits, and not just tequila, mezcal as well, more, raicilla, bacanora, even things that are, related, sotol, which is not an agave spirit, but it's adjacent. There people are still like super excited about this. Everyone is all about tequila. It's like the main thing people will talk about. Like I said, it's still the hottest spirit on the market today, even with all of these things going on. And I've mentioned it a couple of times, but my personal belief is that we are not going to experience a collapse in this market. I really don't think so. My belief in this is that the tequila industry will probably follow something similar to the bourbon industry, where the bourbon industry experiences massive, crazy growth as well, exploded in the early 2010s. People were all about bourbon hunting. There's so many, content creators, so many different things going on in the bourbon world. And then what happened? It didn't just fall off a cliff. I think that, some folks that were in that space maybe moved on, but bourbon sales are still going strong. They're not as strong as they were in comparison to other spirits, but as an overall number of sales, it's still doing pretty well. There are still, really sought after bourbon brands, and there are still people dedicated to talking about bourbon as a whole. What I think tequila is on a path to do is possibly something along those lines, where it's not going to fall off completely. I don't think that tomorrow we're going to look around and go, oh my God, none of these brands are selling any longer. I personally think it's going to be more something along the lines of maybe it'll cool down just a little bit, a tad, right? And it will finally reach that full maturity point where it'll just be it was so popular, it was unsustainable, but instead of falling all the way down here, we're going to fall just a little bit to something a little bit more sustainable, which is what I think the bourbon market has experienced now. There's still great bourbons being made, still incredible expressions being made, but I think maybe eventually that zeitgeist, I hate that word again, here it comes up again, maybe that zeitgeist will pass onto some other spirit, right? Maybe it's mezcal, maybe it's rum. I've predicted in the past that maybe rum will experience an explosive growth. I don't know if it will, because I think rum's a little too crazy and a little too different, whereas tequila is relatively speaking simple, even though it's not simple to produce. I think it's simple to talk about. So I do think that, yes, all of these things are a problem, and I do think that a vast majority of these brand new brands that don't have a leg to stand on, they will be gone in 9 months. And truthfully, I'm happy with that, because I think that there's way too much clouding and creating a bad atmosphere. And the other part of this that I wanted to talk about, it's not really related to the industry as a whole, but the fight between Tequila Matchmaker and the CRT, which has been escalating, and now they are suing Tequila Matchmaker both in Mexico and in the US to really shut them up or try to shut them up. It's messy from a PR standpoint, it's messy from a marketing standpoint, and so I think that it looks like there's really bad omens happening, but I think it'll pass. I think that people are now so in love with these spirits, and they are so obsessed with it that there's so much culture in behind it. It's not just trying to hunt for the best bottle. Each one has a story to tell, and I think that will have an everlasting impact on a generation of people who got to experience this at the crazy ass heights that we are right now. I don't ever see a day where Fortaleza stops being a sought after spirit. I think that what they make is too great. I think what they do is incredible. I think Tequila Ocho will continue being a mainstay brand. I think G4 will continue to grow. They are expanding their distillery to be able to produce more. Tequila goes into these boom and bust cycles, right? If you're really into it, people will tell me you'll see the pattern go over several years. What I think is crazy about right now is that tequila's had this crazy explosive growth on a global scale. It's causing everybody to pay attention rather than just the nerds to pay attention, if that makes sense. And so no, I don't think the tequila market will collapse. Will it probably contract a little bit? Will there be some consolidation where some larger corporations will buy up some smaller brands? 100%, but that happens in every market. There are companies being bought up, and people will consolidate power, and it is what it is. It's just it's part of things. But I think that there's too much love for it. And maybe I'm naive, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Maybe you think that this is going to be a bubble bursting event where it'll just crash and all of these brands are going to be sitting on a ton of products. Let me know in the comments down below. I really just wanted to talk about this, more naturally and more, genuinely. I talk a lot about these going-ons in my newsletter, In Good Spirits. So if you want to check that out, I send a newsletter that covers a couple of different topics every week. And we've talked quite a lot about the battle between Tequila Matchmaker and the CRT and a lot of these different things. So if you're interested in that, give it a subscribe, and you can check that, and you can check, I can't speak right now. And you can check that out in the link down below. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'm done. I think I'm done speaking for today. But anyway, cheers.